Great. Thank you, Brenda, and good morning and welcome. Happy Wednesday. My name is Norm Ames, and I come to you from, actually right now, literally from Topeka, Kansas, doing some work here in Kansas. But I'm the director of the Center for Technical Assistance for Excellence in Special Education. And we get the honor of partnering with the great state of Wyoming, Margie Robertson and her team at WDE to be with you today. And we've assembled what we're calling a paraeducator virtual statewide conference. And what a great opportunity. There are not many states that are offering this kind of thing to its amazing paraeducator staff and their instructional teams. And so we're just honored to be part of this opportunity. And my job here this morning is just to kind of facilitate the process. We've got a great lineup of speakers and presenters, and you'll be hearing as well from your leadership at the state office. And so the first thing we'd like to do is just welcome you as we're getting a few more folks in off of the waiting room. Let me just invite anybody who, excuse me, my voice is going out all of a sudden. Let me just invite anybody who has just joined to just kind of be aware of your audio and go ahead and mute yourself unless you have a question. What we'd like to do is go through some housekeeping items where we'll talk about the Zoom environment here and a couple of other things. So let me click. There we go. So as you know, as you just heard, the conference is being recorded. And the purpose of that is because not everybody was able to join live. And so we wanted to make this content available. So the state is recording it, and the recordings of the presentations will be made available via link, and that will be shared out later. What we're trying to do is make sure that our audio lines are muted, and so kind of just be aware of that. And what we'd also invite you to do is, for bandwidth purposes, is go ahead and turn off your videos. And what we'll try to do is make sure that the speakers are highlighted so that you can see who's speaking. And then if you have questions, either during the sessions or at any time, feel free to post those questions in the chat. And our remote host, Brenda Smith, will be monitoring the chat, as well as myself and a couple of others from the TASTE team. And we will try to address those questions as quickly as we can. If you're having some technical difficulties, feel free to send a direct message to Brenda, Zoom host, I think she's renamed herself as such, and we will try to resolve those questions with you as quickly as we can. And then you'll see the agenda here in just a minute, but the fourth final session this morning is a question and answer panel. And what we envisioned there was an opportunity for you to have your questions addressed by the panel. So as you're listening to the sessions, listening to the presenters, as questions come up, feel free to drop those questions in the chat. And then as well, what we're going to try to do is formally collect those questions using a Qualtrics survey link. And so I don't know, Brenda, has that been dropped in the chat box? Yep. And so just click on that link. It's one field. You click on it and you enter your question, and we will collect those questions and address them during the Q&A panel before the close of the morning today. So that's kind of an exciting opportunity. We do understand that some of you are participating as a group and not necessarily individually. And what we would like to do is ask somebody in your group, the district representative, to collect a sign-in sheet of those that are in attendance, and then submit that to the state. Dina, would that go to you? Okay.
Yes, it would. Thank you.
Okay. So Dina Smith from WDE will collect those sign-in sheets, and what we probably ought to do is put Dina's email in the chat as well for purposes of those sign-in sheets. And then one of the great things too about this opportunity is that paraeducators whose jobs assignments are in a special education setting are eligible for a stipend for attending and participating both half days. So this morning and then tomorrow morning for purposes of this conference. And in order to receive that stipend, what we're asking is that you will receive, if you haven't already, most of you have received a W-9, but you'll receive that W-9, fill it out. Now it's electronically fillable. And so fill it out as best you can electronically if you'd like. And then you have to print it out. Find a way to print it out. Make sure all the fields are complete, including the date and your signature. And then scan it and then email it to Jennifer Duncan at the state. And her email address is provided right here. And I think we'll also drop that in the chat box. Most of these announcements, you'll receive a follow-up email with some instructions after this conference is over. So if I'm talking too quick and you're missing these announcements, it's okay. There will be some follow-up to you directly with this information. And then for timing purposes, we'd like to have those W-9s printed out, signed, dated, and scanned back to the state, to Jennifer Duncan by next Tuesday, August 17th. So it gives us about a week or so. And that way the payments could be made in a timely manner. And it can take, you know how state government works. Oh, did I say that out loud? It can take a number of weeks. So about 8 weeks, I think, is our understanding. So we don't want to set up anybody for some expectations that can't be honored. So just be aware of that. It might take a couple months for the payment to be received by the individuals. Okay. All right. And then one of our final announcements. Anything there, Dina? Did I miss anything? Okay. All right. And again, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. What we would like to do too, and it's related to the attendance and the stipend offering, is that we need you to rename yourself in Zoom and so that we can verify attendance. And your Zoom name will be matched to the name that you used for registration. And so in order to do that, I think I've got another, there we go. So the instructions for you to rename yourself right now, if you can, just take a moment. And I understand that, again, there are groups participating, and that's fine. Maybe what you could do in your group is rename yourself by the district that you're participating in, or the school building. Rename yourself that way. And then again, send in that sign-in sheet, and that way we can verify your attendance against the report that we can print out later. But if you are an individual and your name doesn't match the name that you registered with, go ahead and click on the participants icon. It's either at the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen. You might have to hover your cursor at the top of your screen or the bottom of the screen. Click on participants, scroll to your name, hover over your name, and then you'll see a blue box that says more. Click on the more, click on rename, and then a field will pop up for you to be able to rename yourself. And then I think click save or enter or something like that, and then your name will be saved. It looks like click OK. So there we go. All right. So the conference today and tomorrow morning is, again, it's sponsored by the Wyoming Department of Education. And we've been honored to be asked by the department to help facilitate and organize and implement this conference. We've got some great content speakers that come from the TACE organization, as well as from the state, and some partners of TACE as well. So we're excited to bring them to you today, and we hope that you come away having some great experiences and some additional gained knowledge. So we're excited about that. Well, here's an outlook for the agenda for today. We get to do a celebration and talk about the Parent Educator of the Year for Wyoming. And then what we'll do is we'll jump into the sessions, and there will be a break provided. And so session 1 is all about professionalism and considering the whole child with Dr. Kimberly Hutter from TACE. And I've asked the presenters to go ahead and just do a self-introduction when the presentations start, so that you can understand a little bit more about who they are and why we've asked them to do these topics. Session 2 will come to us from Greg Abel at Sound Options Group, a wonderful friend and partner and amazing presenter. He will discuss issues of confidentiality and communication as part of the instructional team. And then session 3 will come to us from Frank Podobnik at TACE, and he will talk about special education and the big picture. And I wished him luck to do all of that in his amount of time allotted. But the good thing is there will be some follow-up booster sessions made available to you all, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later. And then we'll finish up the day with a session 4 Q&A panel discussion that will include your presenters and the folks from WDE. We'll try to address a lot of the questions that came up throughout the morning. And I think that concludes the announcements and housekeeping. I apologize for taking so long. I hope that addressed most of your questions. And again, let us know if you have any technical questions. Plop those into a direct chat to Brenda Smith, our TACE host, and we appreciate her very much. As many of you know, Zoom hosting or remote hosting looks easy, but behind the scenes, it's not so much. And so I would greatly appreciate her support. And I would just, before I turn it over to our state director, Margie Robertson, I just want to express our gratitude and being able to be part of this wonderful opportunity for you all in your wonderful state. So with that, I will transition over to Margie Robertson, our state director.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to start off, Norm, by just thanking TACE. The Wyoming Department of Education so appreciates our relationship with TACE. We are a very small staff in Wyoming with very big hopes and dreams of what we can do for our educators, and we cannot do those things without partnerships with organizations like TACE. So thank you guys for being willing to partner with us in this project. I'm Margie Robertson, as Norm said, and I am your State Director of Special Education. And I'm so excited to be here with you all this morning on Zoom. It's been a long time since WDE has offered a training specific to paraprofessionals. And I really want to thank the SPED PD team and the work that's been done specifically by Dina Smith in order to put this together in collaboration with TACE. So thank you, Dina, and thank you, SPED PD team, for all the work that's happened. I'm just very excited about this opportunity. I'd also like to thank each of you today for joining us. We know that some of you guys are still on summer vacation, some of you guys are back in the buildings, but we do appreciate you being here for this training. Paraprofessionals play a critical role in providing exceptional special education services and supports to our Wyoming students with disabilities, and that is so important. We know that as paraprofessionals, you provide one-on-one and small group support to students who receive special education. We know that you support students in and outside the general education setting. We know that you develop a myriad of supports, including instructional, language, behavioral, physical, and even medical supports for students. We know that you work really hard to build strong relationships with students and their families, and that is so critical in education. We also know that paraprofessionals help teachers save valuable class time by working with students and helping them to keep pace with their peers. We also know that you teach valuable executive function and social skills, and you encourage and build confidence in our students. And for that, we really value the role that you play in the lives of students and in education. And we, heartfelt thank you from me, but just want you to know how much we appreciate you. Paras are essential in the learning process, and you act as a bridge to student achievement and progress. So on behalf of the Wyoming Department of Education, Superintendent Balo, and our staff here in the Special Education Programs Division, I want to tell you how much we appreciate what you do every day for students. And again, I want to welcome you to this training, and I really hope that you enjoy what we put together for you in the next 2 half days and the booster sessions that we're going to offer you throughout the school year. So thank you and welcome. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Dina.
Thank you, Margie. And I just want to also give a shout out to TACE and all of the work that has gone behind the scenes to get this ready. So thank you so much for that. And to thank you, Margie and Susan, for helping to make this possible, because without them, I wouldn't have been able to put it together. So just very grateful. I started out as a paraprofessional years ago and did that for many years before I became a special education teacher, and then moved on to the state. And so I know where you've been. I've had different roles as a para, and I totally am so grateful for all of the work that you do. There's no way that teachers or families could do it without you. So very grateful for all that you do. So today I am really excited to introduce you to, well, kind of introduce you to our Paraprofessional of the Year, Special Education Paraprofessional of the Year. WDE had decided to do an award for a paraprofessional in similar ways as a Teacher of the Year award. And we got an overwhelming response, 91 nominations. And so I'm going to just share my screen really quickly and just introduce you to her a little bit. This was for the 2020-2021 school year. And one second, let me get to that. So among 91 nominations, Mrs. Trudy Hatch from Lincoln County School District number 2 was selected. And you'll see her in this picture. She is in the front row in I can't tell if it's navy blue or black, but with the white striped shirt. And so we received nomination letters from actually 6 staff members. And during the interview process, many other teachers, administrators, and students showed up to express their appreciation for Trudy. Trudy served as a paraprofessional for over 10 years. And prior to this important work, she was a substitute teacher for many years. We had hoped that she could be with us today to introduce her to all of you, but unfortunately she had a family emergency and couldn't be here today. The following, I'm going to read just a few highlights captured by a few of the responses from the staff that were shared with me regarding Trudy's exemplary qualities and her dedication to not only the students she was asked to work with, but also all students and staff. So here's a few of those responses. Trudy is one of those rare people who warms your heart when you're near and inspires you to do more. When I first met Trudy, I was a new teacher at a new school. I was so very nervous, and I knew right away she was more knowledgeable than I had gained, much more than I, and she had gained much expertise over the years. I was very intimidated by her because I was supposed to be the teacher. Trudy took me under her wing, and we taught each other along the way. She has never complained, not once, in all the time I've known her. She puts a smile on her face and keeps it there no matter what happens throughout the day. Teachers trust her to step in when they need support in her role, and she works to develop a strong rapport with students and does a wonderful job at balancing the need for firm, consistent structures with the need for compassion. She possesses the ability to skillfully work with a student who is experiencing difficulty regulating their emotions and is effective in de-escalating potentially explosive situations. I once witnessed a student that got upset while working through an assignment. I think we've all been there, right? But Trudy leaned back as she swiped the entire table clean, and I was in immediate defense mode, but not Trudy. She sat there for what seemed an eternity, and then she leaned over to the student and quietly asked him if the homework was too hard or if he had something else that he would like to talk about. She understands that behind every behavior, whether good or bad, it is the effect of something else. She is always willing to listen and tries to understand each student on an individual level. She focuses in on what's best for the student. She navigates the complex tasks of supporting students in a variety of settings while enhancing the learning environment. Many times, Trudy could be seen taking books home to learn content so that she could best help her students. And she has a unique way of helping those feel valued that she works with. There was a teacher who also had a son that Trudy worked with, and she said, she worked with my son for 4 years as he went through high school. Trudy would help him understand the concepts that he needed to learn without doing the work for him. I truly appreciate the way she made him feel important and intelligent without making him feel like he was less of a person compared to other students. She builds lasting relationships with all students. The results are evident in each of the students she works with as she continues to have high expectations for each of them and settles for nothing less. She has created an environment in our SPED classroom of acceptance, trust, motivation, and high expectations, and the students come in here and work hard for her. She is such a positive person and makes each day better for me. She is willing to do whatever is asked, and even when given the choice, she will always defer the easier tasks to others while she tackles things that require more work and attention. And they all talked about being able to rely on her, and that she was a friend and not just a paraprofessional. And she was always an advocate for students. And I can tell you during the interview process, when I spoke with Trudy and part of her team, I asked Trudy to share her thoughts and feelings about being a special education paraprofessional. She had a lot to say, and a lot to say about her students and how they've impacted her life. But some of the things that I wrote down today to share with you, since she couldn't be here, was just the importance of, number one, being flexible. 2, rising to the occasion and doing what needs to be done. 3, not taking anything personal when students get upset or frustrated and meeting each of them where they are. Number 4, not just caring about what concept needed to be taught, but taking the time to care about every student and their individual needs. And number 5, remembering why you're there, to help each student make progress and for each one to feel important and successful. Trudy actually retired at the end of this last school year, but I feel very confident she will continue to touch the lives of all those who come into contact with her along her new journey. So I hope that you'll join me in congratulating Trudy on receiving this award. If you know her, definitely congratulate her in person. And if you don't, if you happen to run into her at some point, I hope you do, make sure that you congratulate her. I know that there were so many wonderful nominations sent in. I know that you all worked so hard, and it was very, very hard to make a choice. I can tell you that, because I know that you all have so many of these qualities in you as well. So I thank you for all that you do on behalf of our students in the state. And at this time, I am going to turn it over to Kimberly. So thank you so much for being here again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dina. I don't know about all of you, but I have been emotional a few times this morning for a variety of reasons. Let me go ahead and share my screen with everyone and give you a little bit more understanding of why. So I started my career originally as a paraprofessional about 20 years ago. And at this point, I'm thinking back as I listened to Margie and listened to Dina, thinking back to the experiences I had in the school districts I work. You know what? I never saw anyone from the State Department of Education come to a training. More or less, I never had the opportunity to go to a training. And it pulls at my heartstrings to see the dedication of Wyoming Department of Education to be here and to really support the para educators within the state. I think it's wonderful, and I hope that each and every one of you understand how important you are in the education of all students across the wonderful state of Wyoming. So my name is Dr. Kimberly Hutter, and I, about a year ago, graduated with my PhD in special education. And prior to that, I worked from the bottom up, I guess, not necessarily the bottom up, but started my education at a 2-year technical college and received my associate degree in educational interpreting, which is an American Sign Language interpreter for K-12 students in an educational setting. And so my first jobs were as a paraprofessional I worked in Wisconsin. I'm originally from Wisconsin. And I worked for a few different school districts there. And then eventually I transferred down to Chicago Public Schools and worked there for many, many years. And then eventually went back to school and have ended up where I'm at currently, which is with TASE, the Technical Assistance for Excellence in Special Education. And I provide technical assistance to states across the United States. I'm coming to you from my home office in Clarksville, Tennessee. And I have been to Wyoming numerous times. I actually moved out to Utah when I first started with TASE. And I drove on, to tell you the truth, I can't remember what highway that is, but it's on the south side of Wyoming from Cheyenne all the way over to Utah. And I remember thinking, I didn't know if I was going to make it because I had, I can't remember my cell phone carrier, but Wyoming does not support that. So I had no access. I was by myself on this open road and you just see the same stuff going by. And I pulled over at a gas station in, can't remember the name of the city, but they were so friendly and they had an actual telephone that was plugged into the wall and were so kind and let me use the telephone to contact my connections in Utah so that everyone knew that I was safe because, you know, it was like 4 hours. I hadn't talked to anyone. People were wondering where I was since we're so connected into this world of ours via social media. So with that being said, I'm here to talk to you about professionalism and considering the whole child. And I will ask you to, grab a piece of paper and pen, get your fingers ready. If you can access the chat box, I have a whiteboard that I will be using later. It's going to be interactive and get you guys thinking about your roles and responsibilities and how you fit within the school setting. So welcome, we did that. I talked to you about the activity. We'll go into some professionalism, whole child, have another activity, and then we will wrap it up. So my question to you to get you start thinking about this is, go back to the first day you walked into that school building. Now, I know some of you have many years under your belt, and I know some of you are brand new. Like this is your first year walking into the school. And I want you to think about, how did you feel? Were you excited, nervous, scared? Maybe that's what you're feeling right now. It's a brand new school year. Who did you meet throughout the day? And how did those interactions play out? You can remember meeting maybe someone specific and thinking about, how did that play out for you? Were they positive, negative, hopefully mostly positive, I would think. And then what knowledge and skills did you bring? What knowledge and skills do you have now? Because so many times we walk in knowing that we have all this knowledge and skills, and then later we realize that we've developed a whole plethora of additional knowledge and skills. And this is what I did, right? I took a piece of paper. So please go ahead if you want to grab a piece of paper or a whiteboard. And I sort of did, this is my idea of a graphic organizer when I was doing this, right? I drew myself here. As you can see on the screen, it was my first day of work. And actually, I think about when I went to Chicago Public Schools, because at that time, I lived in the neighborhood. I was 2 blocks away from the school. And I know many of you are very connected to your school community and the communities you're in. And I remember walking to school and there were kids all around. I was extremely nervous, but I was also very excited. I remember meeting the librarians. They were the two of the first individuals I met were the librarians. They were friendly and they were so excited about having another interpreter in the building. And then I met my interpreter team. There were 5 other interpreters, so there were 6 of us all together. And they were amazing. They were so welcoming. They showed me around the school. They introduced me to my new colleagues, to the students. And it was a great day. And I know that I brought specialized skills as an educational interpreter, but I also worked on developing my knowledge of individualized education plans and IDEA. One of the most pertinent things I learned how to do was develop my communication skills, which is definitely something that will be talked about in a later session. But that is extremely important, is to develop those communication skills. And then the last question I'm going to pose to everyone is, as you think about that day that you walked into the school, or maybe it's right now, starting off the new school year, is there anything that you wish your colleagues, the administration, or the students knew about you? Is there anything personal? Maybe there's something culturally that you'd like them to know. Maybe there's, maybe you're very artistic. Maybe you enjoy traveling. Is there anything in your life that those around you might not know about, but you think that it might help your relationship, make your relationship stronger? Maybe think about that. It's always good to reflect on where we have come from and where we are at today. And so with that activity, we're going to jump on in and move on through with professionalism. So a lot of times we don't, as paraprofessionals, don't realize how we're viewed. We come into the school district and we're working with students every day, but we don't realize that we are known. We're known across the United States. And here's an example. Paraprofessionals are written into the No Child Left Behind Act, right? And it was a requirement, is a requirement that paraprofessionals have completed at least 2 years of study at an institution of higher education, obtained an associate's degree. There's rigorous standards of quality, knowledge of instructing, reading, writing, mathematics. So all of this is written into one of our laws, the No Child Left Behind Act. So it's a federal law. People know about paraprofessionals. Here's another one. This shows that we're professionals in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is specifically focused on students with disabilities. Allow paraprofessionals and assistants who are appropriately trained and supervised in accordance with state law, regulations, or written policy in meeting the requirements of this part to be used to assist in the provision of special education and related services to children with disabilities. Well, what does that mean? It means that paraprofessionals and assistants that are appropriately trained can support children with disabilities in an educational setting. And those responsibilities and the quality of the paraprofessional lies upon your state, the state of Wyoming, and what rules and regulations they have for hiring of paraprofessionals, whatever the qualifications are in the state of Wyoming. So again, this is a federal law. Paraprofessionals are recognized. You are professionals in the educational setting that you are in. So here is a link. I believe Brenda will drop it into the chat box, and I'll go ahead and share this document as well. But this is from the Council of Exceptional Children, CEC. I'm not sure if you've heard of CEC, but they provide preparation standards for all areas of special education. And there are CEC standards for special education paraprofessionals. So I'm going to go ahead and pop over here. Whoops. let me get the right one up. I apologize. Here we go. I want to give you just a quick glimpse at these standards from CEC. Now they're currently under revision right now. But I believe, like I said, Brenda will pop that link into the chat box, and it's a PDF, and you can keep that and review it. And these are the preparation standards. So you have standard 1, learner development and individual learning differences. So it looks at what knowledge a paraprofessional should have. And then it also looks at the skills a paraprofessional should have. And excuse my language, paraprofessional is written into the No Child Left Behind Act and into the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And those were done 2004 and earlier. Now, where we're at now, paraprofessionals are now viewed and called paraeducators, which we're going to look at that terminology in a minute. So from here on out, I will use the vocabulary paraeducator as I move forward. And so as you look through this, you can see the different preparation standards and the knowledge and skills that would go hand in hand that paraeducator should possess prior to walking into a school setting. But you also most certainly can move into a school setting. And when you're in that position, work on developing these areas, these skills and these knowledge as well. And yes, so that link is in there. Thank you so much, Brenda. And so that is a resource for all of you to have. We most certainly will let Margie and Dina know when those standards get updated, because that, like I said, they are being worked on, and that will be something that you probably will want to look at in the future. I'm going to hop back over to PowerPoint. Here we go. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. So paraeducator, what does that mean? So the definition of para means being beside, nearby, or along with, or alongside. We take the other part of that, educator is one who develops or trains the mind, capabilities, or character of another by instruction or study. So let's think about it. Who is the educator in your classroom? The educator in the classroom that you serve would be the teacher, right? So then when we take those and we put them together, paraeducator, the definition would be that you work beside or along with the teachers. And that's what you do. That's what we do as paraeducators. We work alongside our partner teacher. And that's another word that you'll hear from me is partner teacher. And these are some new verbiage that is easier to think about because that teacher is your partner. You two will be working together through everything to really support the students in the classroom that you serve, all of those students. This is really extremely important that we start viewing each other as partners. So I'll be referring to that teacher as your partner teacher as well. And so that's what a paraeducator is. That's what you are. You work beside or along with the teachers, with your partner teacher and other teachers in the building. Who else do you work beside? Oops. Who else do you work beside? Go ahead and drop it in the chat box. Who else do you work beside? Good, I see. Students, yes, absolutely, students. Administration, good. School counselors, excellent. Yep, so we have students. This is probably backwards, I bet. And we have school counselors. Very good. Yep, other Paraeducators, absolutely. Other paraeducators, very good. Oh, wow, police. That's a good one. Yeah, police, because you work with the community, right? Yes, school nurse. Administrators. What's the big one I'm leaving out? And I see all of you writing, parents. Yes, parents, very good. There's a whole list. Crisis center. Bus drivers, yes, for transportation. Speech therapists, business owners, when you take a student to a job, absolutely, behavior specialists. Okay, so as you can see, this list can go on and on because you work beside so many individuals in the school setting. Absolutely. Let's think about that. What does that mean? We work beside all of these people. How do we view ourselves? How do we view how we fit into the context of this setting? Yes, I'm a paraprofessional. I know this. I go to school every day. I support this student every day. Is that how I view myself? Am I just, I don't like that terminology, but am I just a paraeducator? No. Think about all those people you just listed, all of them that you work beside. So what that tells me is that you are a member of the instructional team. You're not just a paraeducator. You're not just this individual by yourself, alone in the school district, alone in that classroom. You are a member of the instructional team. And it's important that we start framing that way and thinking about that, because you're part of that community. You're part of that school. You have a partner teacher. You see the terminology? It's about being a community, and it's about working together and coming together, not being individualistic. That's specific for the student, right? Because if we come together as a community and we can support that student as an instructional team, then you have a whole bunch of heads and all of their amazing knowledge supporting that student instead of just one individual. Because I don't have all the answers. I know quite a lot about this little area that I research, but I'll tell you all this other stuff, I don't have the answers, which is why I need to lean on my colleagues, and you need to lean on your colleagues as well. So what are your responsibilities when it comes to being a paraeducator in the classroom and being a member of the instructional team? What does that look like? These are a few responsibilities. There are tons of them. One could be implementing lessons to meet objectives as they're set by the teacher and the IEP team. You may provide follow-up instruction to small groups and individuals. You may reinforce the teaching of the teacher by following lessons. Keep daily student progress records. As we're reviewing these, some of these may be your role and responsibilities. Some of these may not, and that's okay. Also, I want you to remember that a lot of these responsibilities are going to be under the direct supervision of your partner teacher. And that's why it's so important to view yourself as part of that instructional team, because you're working with that partner teacher. And they're going to assist you and support you and help you along as you assist and support that student in achieving, the sky's the limit, right? Achieving whatever they possibly can achieve. You may provide daily updates on student progress and provide input to the teacher and to those other individuals you talked about. Maybe the speech therapist, maybe the behavior interventionist. You may assist with monitoring and scoring assessments. Implement positive behavioral strategies using the same techniques as the teacher, right? You should be on the same page and implementing those the same way. Make daily accommodations for students with approval from the teacher, right? You're working with the teacher. So you see these roles, these responsibilities. Well, that's just a few. What are you doing? Think about it and go ahead and post them in the chat box. What roles and responsibilities do you have or have you had in your setting? What are some roles and responsibilities that you may not have seen? Go ahead and add them to the chat box. Oh, I see someone. I see someone had said that they saw themselves yesterday saying they're just a para. I understand that. Remind yourself to not say that. It takes work, I know. There you go. Someone said they feel like a cheerleader for the student. Absolutely, right? We need to be that cheerleader. Recess duty, yes. I have to tell you, those are some of my favorite times. Or being outside on recess duty. You really got to know the students, not just the students you're working with, but the entire neighborhood of students. Informing the teacher of problems that you see. Yes, you're observing what's happening because the teacher can't observe it all. That's why you're there, because you're partners to make that classroom better. Demonstrating care, absolutely. A stand-in parent. It may not be a responsibility, but it absolutely is something that can happen. These kids, these students come to you, they trust you, and they're going to, and it may feel like you are that stand-in parent at times. Recess duty in warm weather, absolutely. Oh, I remember working in Chicago public schools, and I don't know how cold it gets in Wyoming. I'm assuming it probably can get fairly chilly with that wind. But I know in Chicago, when we would get those, -20, well, they didn't let us outside during that time, but it could get very cold. Yeah, absolutely. Paraeducators see things that the teachers may be unaware of, that there may be struggles at home, struggles with friends, a lot of stuff. Yes. Having patience with students. Yes, students that have behavioral challenges. Oh, maintaining and teaching proper hygiene. Absolutely. Advocating for your student with his peers to help them interact with their peers. Yes, yes. So as you can see, there are a few roles and responsibilities that I brought to you. And they're really focused on instruction, the academic side, right? Instruction, monitoring, assessing, positive behavioral supports. But there is so much more to what you do as a paraeducator. You're not just a paraeducator. You are a partner paraeducator. And maybe that's what we need to start saying. I'm a partner paraeducator. I think that sounds like a great idea. You're not just, you are a partner paraeducator. Because as I remember, Trudy said that we need to care about what that student needs. And we have to remember why we are there. We're there to support students. And in order to support students, we need to create those partnerships, which you're going to get a lot more on that in a later session. Yes, sometimes having to step into roles, different roles when needed, being a parent, nurse, teacher, partner, whew. All of you have a lot of different hats you wear. But I'm going to give you some tools so that maybe you can work through some of that with your partner teacher. So let's look at what we have here. I can get the screen to move. So here, Brenda, if you wouldn't mind dropping the self-reflection for the paraeducator into the chat box. This is, I'm going to bring one up on my side here as well. This is a self-reflection for the para-educator. It's a worksheet that you can do where you go through and think about your experiences, your knowledge, and your skills as a para-educator. It doesn't matter if you have 20 years or if you are just beginning, right? So you're going to look through this and go through each area. For example, as you can see right here, it says classroom organization, duplicating materials. We all duplicate materials, and it's not just us as paraeducators, teachers duplicate materials. We all do it because we're a team. So do you have experience? Maybe you don't have any experience in that. Just make an X that you don't have experience. And maybe there's an area you see that you would be interested in having more professional development around it. So then you could mark that box over here on the end that says priority area for professional development. But you can go ahead and fill out this form. I think it was 2.5 pages. Yeah. So on the third page, there's a little extra room that says, what additional educational experiences do you bring to the campus? Well, we hit on that at the very beginning of this session. I asked if there was anything else that you wanted administration to know or other staff members or students. And that could be the area where you bring those additional educational experiences. Maybe you're a traveler. Those are additional educational experiences. Put those down because everyone can learn from those experiences you've had. Maybe you're an artist. Maybe you enjoy doing pottery. Maybe you do motivational or life coaching outside of this. There's endless things that you could put down as educational experiences that you could bring to the classroom. Maybe you love to cook. When cooking is all about measurement, think of how you could implement that in the classroom. So it's so important to add those extra things that you enjoy doing and that you feel that you're good at, right? That you feel that could add, it's value added to the classroom. And then what we do with this is you take it and you sit down with your partner teacher. It has some directions up here. And go over it with your partner teacher and talk about these things. And because what happens then is the two of you can decide, oh, wait a minute, we do need someone that is good at typing instructional materials. And we don't have anyone in the building. Oh, but creating and maintaining filing systems for materials, oh, so-and-so already does that. So we don't necessarily need to do that. So these are things where when you have two heads meet, your partner teacher and the partner paraeducator come together, look over this, you will have a more concrete idea of what your roles and responsibilities are for that classroom and that specific student. Because any of you that have had more than 1 year in a school system, you know that your roles and responsibilities change. Again, Trudy said to be flexible because we are constantly changing. Our roles and responsibilities change. They change one day to the next. But this form will really help you and your partner teacher look deeper at what do you bring to the table? What would you like to work on? And you can create a whole professional development template for yourself off of this as well. It gives you things to work for. So that is a great tool to use. Brenda, if you wouldn't mind posting in that teacher and paraeducator roles, I would appreciate that into the chat box. And then this is another handout. And we went over these as paraeducator roles, but this is a nice tool to look over as well. It's just a handout on teacher and paraeducator roles, and it sort of looks at what the teacher does and the paraeducator. Now, this is not concrete, right? Because it's all dependent on the student you have, but it's a guide. And sometimes that's just all we need, is to have that guide, to know that, you know, we're on the right path. We're doing what we need to be doing for this student. And it gives you something that can support you, and gives you just another tool to add to your toolbox. So that is shared, and I believe that I will get everything that I share with you today and make sure that Dina gets that, and that we can get it out to everyone. Okay. So now that we have looked at our roles and responsibilities and more of the professionalism side, we're going to change focus here. And we're going to take a look at the whole child. Now, as I was watching the chat box before, I have seen many of you talking about the whole child. And it's really important that we understand the terminology, because we hear people using it in the classroom all the time. I remember, and still to this day, it doesn't matter how much experience you have, I still can walk into a classroom and hear individuals talking about things that I don't know. I haven't heard that terminology yet, because terminology comes and goes, right? So this is really just to expose you, to give you some more information on what does that look like? What is the whole child approach? So let's start here. And you can put it in the chat box. What comes to your mind? What do you think of when you hear the phrase whole child? What pops into your mind? Go ahead and post it in the chat box. Whole child. Physical and emotional, the needs of the child, mental, physical, spiritual, their health, educating all facets of the learner. Oh, a whole person, not just the disability. Knowing how students learn, absolutely. Again, more than just their disability. Thinking about all of their needs, their home lives, yes, their family life, culture, community. Absolutely. Anything in the environment that could influence them. Oh, the students' likes, their interests, their talents, their character. Good. PBIS, health, education, personality. Yes, absolutely. How to support their parents or their grandparents or their caregivers. Yes, that child as a whole. Yes, these are wonderful, wonderful, you guys. So now we're thinking in terms of what is that whole child? What is that whole child approach? Let's take a look. Okay, so here we have a whole child approach. This actually comes from the Learning Policy Institute. And again, I will get you this so you can have this infographic. But as you can see up on, I wonder here, I think I can spotlight it. Yep, right here, this equity. So this is talking about creating educational equity for a child. So if we can bring these 6 areas together, we can create educational equity for a child. But we don't only need that, we need the community. We need to look at the community, the environment, and the relationships that that student has, right? The relationships in the environment, in the community, and personal relationships. And so we have 6 areas that for the whole child approach, and they are mental health, physical health, cognitive development, academic development, identity development, and social emotional development. And we're going to take a brief look at each area just to give you a better understanding of what falls within that particular area. Oops. So first, we're going to look at social emotional development. Social emotional development is the child's experience, their expression, their management of emotions. It allows the child to identify and understand their own feelings, to be able to comprehend the emotional state of others. They're able to manage strong emotions and their expression in a constructive manner, right? A positive manner. They can regulate their own behavior. They develop empathy for others, and they establish and maintain relationships. These are what a healthy social emotional, this is what healthy social emotional development would look like. I have I'm going to share a little personal stuff with you. I have 4 stepchildren, and my stepchildren came from a very abusive situation with their mother, and they're with us 100% of the time. And this is the stuff that we're seeing as the social emotional development. And I'm just going to share it because sometimes it's hard to notice. And to tell you the truth, could walk into a classroom and I may not identify it right away. But one example is establishing and maintaining relationships. You see that it's establish and maintain relationships. Those go together. You may have a student that you see that establishes relationship, establishes another one, and then another one, and another one, but they don't maintain them. And that is not a healthy social emotional development. So we need to look at these as a whole, right? And look for those little nuances that you may see coming from the child. If you see it once, just sort of keep an eye on it. If you see it repeatedly, then that's something that you want to talk to the partner teacher about, and bring that instructional team together so that you're able to move forward in supporting that child with their social emotional development. Identity development. The child works on developing a sense of understanding of themselves. This is a tough one. It's a tough one in this world. They all are. But with the social media and the influence of individuals around them, we need to make sure that we're looking at that identity develop. It looks at their self-concept. During this time, they're developing their personality. And you'll see students start having a value set, the moral set, right? So how their identity develops, an understanding of themselves. Their academic development. This is where the child develops knowledge and skills that contribute to effective lifelong learning. Now, the key word there is effective, because a child could most certainly develop knowledge and skills, but it might not be effective to their lifelong learning. We see that a lot, where a child may not effectively be able to apply that skill. So we need to keep our eyes open for that. So we want to make sure we're looking and that the child is understanding and responding to the discussions that are happening in class, that they're communicating effectively, right? Because there is a way that you may communicate, but it might not be effective. That they're analyzing materials, that they're able to do that there's effective academic writing, and that they are attentive listeners. That's all part of academic development. And I want you guys to all know that all of these areas, there's a lot more under each area that you can most certainly go out and research. And this is just really brushing the surface of it. Cognitive development. This is where the child constructs their thought processes. It includes information processing, conceptual resources, perceptual skills, language learning, reasoning. All of this is included in cognitive development. Again, there's a lot more. Physical health. Many of you mentioned that. This is where a child develops a healthy lifestyle. There's regular exercise, balanced nutrition, adequate rest. I know that I'll hear my kids say, well, why do we have to have gym class? Well, the reason why is because our schools recognize that it's important for children to develop their physical health, right? And part of that is regular exercise. And some of our students don't get regular exercise at home. And again, I'm going to say more so than not, with the increase of technology and bringing social media in, many times, what do kids do? They get home and here they're at. They're on their phone or they're on their computer. So it is really important that these children are exercising regularly, that they have balanced nutrition, and then adequate rest. An area I always think at with the nutrition is that our free lunch programs. Those are great programs to have because that does support that student in a nutritional capacity if they're not able to get the nutrition they need from home. And then mental health, the child's emotional, psychological, and social well-being. This is where they learn healthy social skills and learn how to cope when there are problems. I know daily as paraeducators, we're working intensely one-on-one with students, and we see a lot of these areas that may show out. And that is where those that observation and recording of these behaviors play an important role. Because as we record these, and if they become a pattern, that is, where you want to have those discussions with your partner teacher. Because if we can take this whole child approach, we're going to be able to support that student in moving forward and just having a lifelong positive, healthy environment, healthy interactions, and healthy work life, etc. So we're going to jump into an activity now, and we're still thinking about the whole child, okay? And this picture right here is a graphic organizer, sort of, one of those clouds. And so I'm going to run you through an example. And if you have a piece of paper and a pencil, please go ahead and join in. And we're going to think about one student that you support. Now, don't write their full name or anything. We want to make sure that we keep it confidential. So I'm thinking of a student that I used to work with, and I am just going to put the first letter of her name and write it in this circle here, okay? And so that's my student that I support. And so based on the whole child approach, I'm going to think about what needs do they have? What might they be experiencing at home, in class, in the community? And think about how I can support them. That would be the end, would be how I can support them as a whole child. So for example, this student that I had was in foster care. So I would write that in a circle. And I apologize, everyone, because I know this is backwards, I believe. But so I put foster here. So that's, so I need to take that into account when I'm thinking about that student, right? I also know that this student gets free and reduced lunch and breakfast. So there's a few things that are going on there in my mind where I may be making some inferences on what is happening in the child's home life. I'm not going to go up and start questioning them. I'm just thinking about this child as a whole, right? The child also had diabetes. And so that child physically had to get insulin shots and would go see the nurse. So I knew that about the child, right? I would see the child, I would look at the child's clothing when they would come to school, right? And I would see dirty clothing. So again, I'm looking at what might they be experiencing, what needs do they have? And then as I'm going through this activity, I'm thinking about the student, and based on these things, and as you see, I didn't put their disability down. Now I can, this student was identified as deaf, no residual hearing, profoundly deaf. And so that means then that I have to think about cognitive development, because there's language learning going on there. And that child, this student was born to hearing parents and did not have exposure to a full and complete language in those early years. So we're dealing with a different kind of language delay there. So as you can see, this activity is something that you can do with the students that you currently have. You could use it as an activity of thinking about students that you've had in the past. And the whole goal of it is just to really think about that student and think about their individual needs. And what could that student be experiencing, and knowing that, how can I make it better for them? In what ways can I support them? And when you start looking at these, because, as paraeducators, a lot of you are saying, oh, I have lunch duty or I have recess duty. We're with the students all day long, all day. Some of you might, I don't know, you might have bus monitors that are with the student you work with. So that would be, making sure that that bus monitor is brought into the conversation with your partner teacher as well, to talk about things that they're seeing. But this is all data. You're collecting data when you do this activity. And this helps you and your partner teacher determine if there are any other areas that you can support this child, so that you're viewing them as a whole and not just a student with a disability, because that's not the case, right? Every student has their own experiences, and we want to make sure that we are supporting them in all the unique ways that we can support them, because what you guys are doing is amazing work. And those students, they may not know it yet, but they will be thanking you later. I'm sure some of you hear from your students on social media saying, thank you for this, thank you for that. And those are, those really, when you get those, it really makes it worth it. It's always worth it, right? But you know that you've done what you needed to do. So this is a little activity I wanted to share with you. It's fun, it's interesting. It can be challenging in terms of how much emotional energy you have, because we do have students that are facing some solid challenges. But if we can provide them safety and care and support, we can get them to where they need to be. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. So some takeaways: you are a member of the instructional team, you're a partner paraeducator, you have a variety of responsibilities. All of your responsibilities are going to be different dependent upon the school district you're in, the student you're working with. And when we start looking at this whole child approach, we need to start implementing the whole child approach and make sure that we are viewing it through that lens and not just that student. They're that just that student with a disability. But then here's this question: how do we bring all of these areas together? You're sitting here, head turning, wheels are spinning. Wait, I'm a member of the instructional team. Maybe you haven't been before. Maybe I know that Wyoming Department of Education uses instructional team. They know that you are part of that instructional team. Is it reaching your schools? I'm sure it is, but you might not have heard it yet, and that's okay. And so how do we bring that together? The instructional team, the responsibilities, the whole child. It's a lot. It's a lot. How do we bring it together? Does anyone know? Does anyone know? Can you write it in the chat box if you know? What do you think? How do we bring it together?
Simone just said communication is a must.
Oh, Simone. I think you just hit that on the head. There it is. Whoa, communication. Yes, communication is how we bring that together. A recent study by Mason et al., they found that a lack of systematic communication among colleagues, especially between teachers and paraeducators. That's what we need to do, is change that. And we can change that with communication. This is going to lead into the next session with Greg. And I want you to just think about, who are you connected to? Who are you communicating with? Or who are you connected to? Or who are you supposed to be connected to and you're not communicating with? And Greg is going to fill you in on a whole bunch of additional things around confidentiality, communication, teams, etc. I just want to thank you all. I appreciate everything you do. Keep at it. I'm rooting for you. I'm on your team, and every one of your students is extremely lucky. And I hope you have a wonderful school year. Thank you all.
Wonderful, Kimberly. Thank you so much. I'm loving watching the chat box. You guys have, speaking of communication, no lack of skill there and being able to communicate your thoughts. Some really great points in there. And yeah, Greg even chimed in there just now, Kimberly, thinking, oh no, she's gonna take my stuff, my communication piece. But no, I'm just kidding. So folks, let's take a few minute break. We'll come back with Greg Abel at the top of the hour. Greg, if you want to, yep, okay, awesome. So we've got Greg's session coming up here in just a few minutes. So right at 11 o'clock, we will jump right back into this. So feel free to go and take a break, grab your drink, your beverage of choice, maybe finish your breakfast, whatever you need to do, and we will be back at the top of the hour.
Well, good morning, and thank you for coming back and joining us. Greetings to you from the Pacific Northwest. So I'm sort of at the other end of the country from Kimberly. Greetings from the Seattle area. My name is Greg Abel, and just a little bit of introduction about me. I've been an educator for 40 some years. I started in 1979, which means I'm really an old guy. Started in 1979 working in the IDEA as a school psychologist, moved from school psychology, moving into program coordination and administration, then working in general education, primarily around student support services. I left education after about 15 years to enter what was the emerging dispute resolution field, got involved in mediation, and became very passionate about that work. Really leveraged my sort of background as a psychologist. I started a nonprofit mediation center. And then in 1994, our state of Washington put out a response, an RFP, we call it, a request to design a mediation system for special education. And so having been a special educator, having then been a mediator, subsequently then responded to that contract and ended up designing in 1994 a mediation system for working with families and educators in resolving disputes regarding the delivery of services to students on IEPs, under IDEA, and I've actually managed that contract since. Since that time, I've started then what was the Sound Options Group. And Sound Options Group, if you were to put us in a box defining what we do, is we really support people to work together effectively in a collaborative context, in the context of effective teaming, which means we work both reactively, we provide mediation services, facilitation for people who are dealing with conflict, having difficult conversations. And then we also spend a significant amount of time working proactively to build capacity within our system for navigating conflict effectively. You know, one of the things that I've learned over the years, having been an educator, is that educators in general, and again, this is a bit of a generalization, I suppose, but tend to be conflict averse, if not highly conflict averse. And so we find ourselves stuck often as teams. And I want to come back to this notion that Kimberly really laid out on the table about building instructional teams. We struggle as instructional teams about how to navigate the differences of opinion and the differences of perspective. And depending how we choose to navigate those conversations, we will sometimes create unsafe, toxic relationships where people don't share information with each other. And in other cases, what we've learned is that conflict and differences of different ideas and different perspectives is really the context for innovation and creativity, if we can learn to engage in those conversations. So the vast majority of the work that I do now is working in training and professional development, in building both our individual and our collective capacity to come together to have, the critical conversations that we need to have, the crucial conversations we need to have regarding the needs of the students that we serve, and to have those in effective ways that really leverage our unique perspectives and expertise in service of that. So I bring that background to this. The other piece that I bring to this is I'm married to an educator. And so my wife was a paraeducator for 25 years. And so it's been interesting for me to reflect on this particular topic and actually, bringing into the conversation her experience as a paraeducator. She spent her early time working in speech and language, and her background's in early childhood development, and then spent the vast majority of her career working in special ed preschool context. So again, coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, specifically, I live on an island called Bainbridge Island. And while that's significant, what makes that significant is living in an island community as an educator has ramifications for the issue of confidentiality. And what I mean by that is that we're a small community and everybody knows everybody. And so, you go to the same grocery store, you often, participate in same faith communities. And so, the issue of confidentiality, particularly in small communities, and, knowing a bit of the layout of Wyoming there, many of you come from small communities where, communication and barriers sometimes that we need to address around confidentiality become a challenge. So that's where we're going to focus. I want to start just by, sounds like Wyoming, yeah. The eastern side of our state is definitely like Wyoming. That is, oh my gosh, there's someone here born from Bainbridge. That's great. The eastern side of our state is very agricultural, wheat field. The western side of the state is, again, the more liberal side of the state, but also the coastal side. I want to just echo again something that Kimberly identified and others have identified as we started this conversation. And that's the idea of being just a para. I mean, that's again, one of those things that just pushes my buttons, and it pushes my buttons in a number of contexts. And let me just share a couple of examples. I was working with an elementary school staff that I've worked with over the years, amazing staff. And I was working with their building leadership team. And, there was a paraeducator representative on the building leadership team. And one of the conversations we were having as a team was, how can we as a team support each other to more effectively participate, in our team process? And they went around in a circle, and it was just a very collaborative team, very highly respectful team, and they were sharing these perspectives. And And one of the, when they got to the educator, the classified staff member, she said, well, I could use some help in people asking my opinion because, I'm just a para. And the team just sort of stopped. Go, what do you mean you're just a para? Because what you need to understand is that this was an elementary school that served one of the primary tribal communities within our area. This para-educator was a highly respected member of that tribal community, and in fact, a tribal elder. And basically what the team was saying, you as a para-educator are a cultural navigator for us. You know this community, you know the families, and you bring an incredible depth of understanding to the context in which we're providing our services. So this idea of, just a para, again, I want to, take that away. I find it interesting because my wife and I, we've lived on the island where we live for almost 40 years, raised our children here who happen to live here also. I find it, interesting every once in a while to be going in the grocery store and a 6'4" high school student would come up to my wife and go, Mrs. Abel, how are you? And I'm going, who is this guy? And he goes, yeah, I had him in preschool. And so again, in those communities, those kinds of connections occur. But the piece I also want to make, and my wife and I have had these conversations is a number of times, is that you touch people's lives. You touch the lives of the students you serve. You touch the lives of the families of those students you serve. And what I would really hope that you'd understand, and I don't use this term lightly, is that you create legacies in the children and the services that you, the children and the families that you serve. To the extent that they will remember you, they will remember the impact, they'll remember how you showed up. And as Kimberly was talking about, how you showed up with them as a whole child and as a whole family in supporting them. So I would just like to add my acknowledgement of the significant role you play as a member of a professional team that brings diverse expertise and experience to table to do the work that we're going to be doing. So with that in mind, I want to start by just sharing probably one of my favorite quotes of all time. This is a quote that comes from an article called Relationships Within the Schoolhouse by a guy named Roland Barth. As an educator, Roland Barth was a teacher, was a building principal. He started what eventually became the principal preparation program at Harvard. But this is the first paragraph of an article he wrote called Relationships in the Schoolhouse. And he says, one incontrovertible finding emerges from my career spent working in and around schools. The nature of the relationship among the adults within a school has a greater influence on the character and quality of that school, and I added the bold, and on student accomplishment than anything else. Let me just read that one more time, if you don't mind. One incontrovertible finding emerges from my career working in around schools. And this is a 30, 40-year career. The nature of the relationships among the adults within a school has a greater influence on the character or quality of that school and on student accomplishment than anything else. So when we're talking about communication, when we're talking about professional teams, when we're talking about instructional teams, it's not just what those teams do together, it's how they do that work together, how they build a culture of a team that's working and pulling in the same direction. And there's more and more research that has emerged even since he wrote this particular article, which supports if you go into a school and when you see marked evidence of positive, healthy relationships between the adults within the system, and by adults, I mean, the administration, teachers, paraeducators, office administrative staff, and parents in the community, you will see statistically marked improvement in student performance. And when you go into schools where there's a toxic environment, where people aren't communicating with each other, where people aren't sharing, where they aren't leveraging the gifts and expertise they bring to this work, we see a drop in student performance. So what I want to focus on in our time together, it's we focus on all of the range of work that we do. And I think, Kimberly did an incredible job in just really scoping out the context of the work that we do. But the piece I want to focus on is, how do we do that work? And how do we organize ourselves as a team to be effective in doing that work? And how we organize our team will, in fact, have a significant factor on that effectiveness. So the question I'd like to ask, and you can just throw your responses into the chat box, is think of a time you participated in a team and you were really satisfied with that experience. In other words, you really enjoyed working with that team. You looked forward to going to work. And what I'd like you to do is just throw into the chat box, what were some of the attributes or characteristics that supported that experience? What supported? And this could be a team clearly within an educational context, but we can think outside that context, maybe thinking of a team in a community context or in a volunteer organization or something like that. But where you were focusing on working interdependently, what supported that? Feeling like I mattered, that I had a voice, flexible communication, listening, respect, mutual goals. I love it. I'm just getting these. The team included everybody, mutual respect, made to feel important. I'm not just a cursory member of the team. No, I'm a member of the team. All of our voices were equal. They were valued. Listening. And listening not just to respond, but listening to learn. Again, teams where contributions were generally respected. Thank you. And you can continue to drop those into the team, into those. And I just really appreciate that. So effective teams don't just happen, okay? My experience is in too many cases where a group of people come together and they say, okay, we got some work together. Let's get going and let's start doing the work, okay? And what I'm really excited about that within the particular audience of our presentation today is that there are a number of you who you're not, that you're paraeducators, you're teachers. My understanding that within the audience, there are some administrators out there, program coordinators, things like that. I love this one. Each member was able to contribute without being judged. Joy, thank you for that. I think that, again, that it was a safe context where I could share my perspective for moving forward. And so when I'm in my decision to focus on communication, there was really sort of two directions we could go with this. One, we could go to really more focusing on what I would call maybe micro communication, interpersonal communication, where we're focusing on good active listening and asking good questions and things like that. And that's important, and those are essential skills. We're going to talk about that. But I want to step back and I want to look at communications in many ways from more of a systemic perspective. How do we create a system? How do we sustain a culture as an instructional team that supports our ability to come together and share information and to learn together and to apply that information in service of the children and the family that we serve? A couple of beliefs that I have working with teams and about teams. One, the number one function of any team is to engage in shared learning, okay? And that really is based on the notion is, why do we come together as a team? Well, we come together as a team because the nature of the issues that we're addressing are more complex than any of us can address on our own. And so we come together as a team with differential experience, differential expertise, designed to address the complexity of the work that we're doing in this context of working with children and families. I was reading a book a number of years ago. It's called The Checklist Manifesto by a guy named Atul Gawande. Some of you may be familiar with the book, but that's not the point. In the book, the author was differentiating between simple problems, complicated problems, and complex problems. And he was giving examples. So if I'm solving a simple problem, what would be an example of a simple problem? He said, well, that'd be like baking a cake. Now, I don't want to offend anybody who happens to be an excellent baker, but if I want to bake a cake, it's a pretty simple problem for me. Why? Because I typically go to the pantry, pull out a box and add a few things and you got a cake pretty much, okay? So a cake, making a cake is a simple problem because someone else has figured out how to do it. And in one case, they put all the ingredients in a box, or in another case, they wrote it down on a recipe. Now you're going to wonder, where am I going with this example? So just stay with me for a moment. He then goes to, well, what is the example of a complicated problem? If we got a simple problem, what's complicated? What makes that different? He said, a complicated problem is like building a rocket. Now, obviously, building a rocket is more complicated than baking a cake. However, what makes it somewhat similar to baking a cake is that if we design and build and launch a rocket, and if that rocket is successful, what makes it like a cake is that if we build another one exactly like it, it's going to be successful. So again, it's obviously way more complicated than baking a cake, but once we figured it out, we can do it again. So then it gets to the third example. When we got to the third example, he says, what's an example of a complex problem? And when I read his example, I just really started laughing. He said, an example of a complex problem is like raising children. And I laughed about that for a couple of reasons. One, because we always talk about, a rocket science, that's about really complex. The point I'm making, the work that we do as instructional teams is not simple work. We sometimes call that technical work. It may be complicated work, but fundamentally it's complex work. And actually what made me laugh when I heard this definition was that I thought about my own children. So I have a 37-year-old son and a 35-year-old daughter. And, basically everything that my wife and I learned, for the most part, raising our son was not transferable to raising our daughter. What it took to bring them to successful adulthood, which, they are, was radically different. It was a new learning curve. So the point I want to reinforce with this, as an instructional team, your job is to function as an interdependent, collaborative team focused on shared learning. And you, all of you, paraeducators, teachers, administrators, office staff, the custodians, in many cases can become the staff, and that they add information, add knowledge to our collective ability to do this work, okay? So if that's the case, how do you build a team? How do you build an instructional team? And this is why I'm really glad we've got this broader, diverse audience here, is how do you build an effective team that will leverage our ability to do that complex work? Now, in the work that I do, and I spend quite a bit of time working with teams, both in a proactive way, in collaborative way, and how to build a team, and then how to maintain and function effectively as a team. But I also spend a certain amount of my time intervening in teams where there's a challenge has occurred or some problem has arisen, okay? And so we use this notion of that really effective teams, what they do is they balance what we call task with maintenance. They balance task with maintenance. And what I mean by that is that when teams come together, they typically have a task, okay? In some cases where there's clarity on what that task is, and some cases there's not necessarily clarity around that task, okay? And what often happens is that when teams come together, they assume, and again, recognizing all of the attributes of the notion of assuming, we assume that we're operating with common understanding about what we're here to do as a team and how we're here to do it as a team. And in fact, we're busy people. And as educators, we haven't got a lot of time. We got work to do. And so we very often jump in and just begin doing the work, okay? And at the risk of being somewhat crude, that's what keeps me in business. Because as we begin to do the work, we begin to realize that we're operating with very different expectations, not just about what we're here to do, but how we're here to do it. And I've come into the situation just assuming that, well, we're all operating on the same page and we're going to do the work. And so while this is not a para responsibility, this is a para role as a member of the team. And I think in many cases, this is an administrator's role, a teacher leader role in facilitating the conversations where we are going to build what I would call the structure of the team that will support us to be effective, okay, to build the structure. And that's fundamentally what we're doing, is we're building a context, we're building a container, we're building a community in which we can do complex work, where we can bring diversity of opinion, different points of view together, and we can engage in shared learning around that and apply that learning to the situations in which we find ourselves. Now, again, in the context of education as a profession, we're busy people. And we often think, I haven't got time for this. We got work to do. Let's just get on with the work. We'll figure it out as we go along. Yeah. And we'll stub our toes in the process. And it's important, I think, again, to recognize is that what we are fundamentally building goes back to that original quote. How do we create a quality of relationship, of trust and respect among those of us on the team so that we can do the work that we do, and recognizing that to the extent we're able to do so, we are improving and supporting student success. Now, I want to share a personal example, and this, you may be wondering where this is coming from because it's really outside the context of education, but just sharing a personal example of where this idea of taking time to slow down and create this space was important. About 35 years ago, early on, when we moved to where we are, I made a decision, which whether it was a wise decision or not, I'm still wondering, but decided to build my own house. My wife and I had become part of a small community of young couples, and 4 or 5 of the young couples were all building their own houses. And, someone, said, hey, Greg, you moving in, you're going to build a house. Why don't you build it yourself? And I go, yeah, sure, I can do that. Duh. And so, I set out and ended up building my own house. And my dad ended up helping me. My mom and my dad actually sold the house that I grew up in, moved to the island where we live. And my dad and I spent 3 years building this house together. So we're building this house, we get the house framed, and it's, the weather's beginning to change. And so I need to get the roof on the house because I want it to be dry. And so I'm kind of in a hurry, and it's a fairly large roof. It's got a lot of space on it. And so, I tell my dad, I said, Dad, I'm going to start doing the roof. I'm going to start hauling the shingles up there and start doing the roof. He said, no, not yet. I go, what do you mean? He said, we need to build a scaffolding. You know what a scaffolding is? It's a walkway sort of support system around the house. He said, before you start working on the roof, we need to build this scaffolding so that you can work off the scaffolding on the roof. It'll be a lot safer. I'm going, yeah, that's a waste of time. And I don't want to spend time building a scaffolding. We're trying to build a house, and let's get the roof up there. Now, my dad's an engineer. He was a Boeing engineer, and he said, no, we're not going to do this. And so, of course, I respect my dad tremendously. And I said, okay. So we spent the next 2 or 3 days building this scaffolding system that really went all the way around the house. On one side of the house, it was sort of 1 story, but it was on a hillside. And so on the other side of the house, it was like 3 stories from the roof, down below. And so we, did that particular process, and I got up on the roof and, started hauling my shingles up there and doing the work that I was doing. And one day I'm working on the roof and I slipped and I fell off the roof. And I fell off the roof on the downhill side, which means I was 3 stories up. And what saved me was that scaffolding. And I use that as an example, is that if that scaffolding had not been there, if we had not taken time to create this really safety system, I would have fallen 3 stories down and probably had significant injuries, okay? And so what that reinforced for me was a quote that many of you have heard, but sometimes this is a quote that I like to share, is that sometimes you need to slow down in order to go faster. Sometimes we need to slow down and we need to take time to really create what we're trying to create in order to do the work that we're trying to work. Now, over the years, we've identified, and you'll see them on the screen here, 7 areas where there is potential value in creating shared expectations as a team. And so as a member of the team, these are 7 areas where you might want to, as a team, engage with questioning as to what are your understandings, what are your expectations as it relates to these areas, and how we're going to function as a team. And we've identified these 7 conversations from a couple of different contexts. One is just the literature, but more often than not, when I'm working with teams who are struggling, more often than not, this becomes a bit of a diagnostic. And so again, as educators, as a part of a team, instructional member, para-educator, whatever, it's helpful to be thinking about, do I have clarity with my team members in these areas? Is lack of clarity in these areas hindering or getting in the way of my ability to be effective? And if I have questions, might I want to pose questions to my colleagues to determine if we need greater clarity to be more effective? So I'm going to go through these just, not real quickly, but just go through them briefly. And I want you to think about the teams that you're on. Think about the para-educator team that you are on even now, and sort of assess to what extent do you have clarity in these areas related to your work, okay? The first is purpose. Do we have a common purpose? And I loved it in the chat box. Many of you are saying that in those contexts where you've been an effective member of a team, you were operating with a sense of mutual purpose, okay? So do we have a clear sense of purpose? Now, purpose can occur in many contexts. Do we have a purpose in general as a team as to what we are here and what we exist to do? Do we have a shared purpose around a specific project or initiative? Do we have a shared understanding of the purpose of what are the goals and objectives that we are applying to this particular student? But are we operating with clarity of purpose? A second context is behavioral expectations. And behavioral expectations really comes in lots of different languages. We sometimes call them ground rules, operating principles, protocols, behavioral norms and things like that. But the point is, and I don't like to call these ground rules, to be honest, because I really want them to be more, they're not about, someone said we don't call these ground rules, we call them group covenants. And I go, that's an interesting term. I mean, why do you use the term covenant over ground rules? And they go, well, in our experience, what's a covenant? A covenant is a promise. And in our experience, a promise is meant to be kept. A rule is meant to be broken, which I thought was funny. So the point is, have we created expectations about how we are going to be in relationship, how we will have difficult conversations, how we will maintain trust and safety as a community, as a team, so that we can be effective in doing the work that we're doing? Roles and responsibilities. Again, as a member of a team, an instructional team, you have diverse roles and responsibilities. And is there clarity as to the roles and responsibilities? You know, your teacher who is responsible for the IEP potentially, or responsible for the classroom, has a level of authority and roles and responsibilities and requirements that they have. You know, as a paraeducator, you have roles and responsibilities that may be different than other paraeducators within your program. And you have specialists who come in, speech and language pathologists. And so understanding our roles and responsibilities so that we can be working interdependently and collectively as a whole. The fourth area is we call internal interactions. And internal interactions is how do we do things around here? I mean, how do we communicate? And this is often where communication occurs. So as a team, you know, and particularly I think this is challenging for paraeducators because often there is limited time within your day to actually meet with your other team members just because of, you know, financial constraints and things like that. So the question is, how are we as a team going to communicate with effectively? How am I going to debrief with my teacher? How am I going to share information that needs to be shared that I become aware of when I was talking to the bus driver? How do we make decisions as a team? Hierarchically, what does that look like? What gets communicated, which we'll talk about in a moment. Sharing resources with each other. How do we share resources? So internal interactions really becomes the logistics of how do we work together to be a smooth operating machine to do the work that we're doing. You know, taking breaks, who takes breaks, who doesn't take breaks. Those have all been issues that have come up. A fifth area, which we're going to come back to in more detail, is external connections. And that's where we're going to get into confidentiality. What gets communicated? What doesn't get communicated? What gets communicated within the team? What gets communicated outside the team? How does it get communicated? Who communicates that? And so we're going to get into that whole idea of confidentiality in a moment here. I'm sorry. The sixth area, I think, of values in a conversation is, what are the values that drive the work that we do? And in every system I've worked in, you know, they have a set of values. And in many cases, we can name the value, but the question is, have we actually, what I would say, operationalized that value? And I mean by operationalizing that, for example, here's a value. We have a value of inclusion. Oh yeah, okay, I know what that means. Do we know what that means? Does the value of inclusion, have we stepped back and said, yes, this is what, you know, is driving decisions and how we make those decisions? You know, working in the birth to 3 system, there's a value that, you know, we deliver services in the natural environment. That's a term, that's a value. What do we mean by natural as environments? Do we have a shared understanding? And I think as paraeducators who are expected to be operating within the system and operating in alignment with those core values, is that, you know, ask the question, what do you mean by that? You know, you keep talking about this natural environment thing. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by family driven? You know, what do you mean by youth guided? I mean, those different systems have those different values. And finally, again, talking about communication, it's hard to not talk about communication without talking about language. And again, education has a language. Education has, again, we're the, you know, the classic, you know, community of acronyms, but taking time to understand language. And when you don't understand, ask the question, what do you mean by that? And particularly as a team, and I think, you know, Kimberly identified this, where you're working potentially with other entities within the community, you know, designed to support learning and education, they may use different language. And so what I would reinforce for you as a paraeducator, as it particularly comes into this context of shared expectations, is that if you don't know, ask, be curious, because the reality is, if you don't know, someone else might not know and be asking that same question, and yet be afraid to ask the question because we assume, well, everybody knows that. And so I believe that, again, an effective team is committed to shared learning. I also believe that the success of our team is a shared responsibility. And so as a member of the team, if I have questions, if I need clarity in any of these areas, it's important that I take time to ask those questions. I would just ask in a moment, just for a moment, would just throw into the chat box, where have you found, let me ask you this, where might you be on a team where one or more of these areas needs clarification, okay? And just, throw it out there. Where might you be going, as I think about my team, I'm really clear on this one, but I'm not so sure on that one. What might what might be an example of where you may want to go back and seek clarity? Thank you, Sherry. All areas. I appreciate that. You got a conversation ahead of you here. Anybody else? Just examples of where this, when new programs are rolled out, the child's IEP, external connections, yes. Cultural norms, communication between parents and the principal. IEPs and 504s, again, what's the difference? That's a great one. Roles and responsibilities in the classroom. Now, that's another interesting one, because there's, particularly if you're a paraeducator who's maybe working in a special education setting, and now you're out delivering services in the classroom, every one of those classrooms has different expectations. Some grade levels and teams are great at communicating, others are not so good. Language so as not to offend. Yep, absolutely. All right. So you got it. You got it. I believe that these conversations need to occur at various times within our sort of educational calendar, okay? And the first would be, they need to occur, excuse me, I think once a year. We go back and we revisit these once a year. School starts in, August, September, we should revisit these. When new members join the team, you need to review these conversations as a way of onboarding people onto the team so that they can feel safe and a member of the team. When your team is maybe struggling and really sort of bumping up against each other, you may want to use these conversations as sort of a diagnostic for moving forward. So I'm looking at my time here, and it is fast going by. And so, again, I appreciate the input. I want to talk about confidentiality briefly now, and not just briefly, because this really is the area of communication, where we're not talking about how will we communicate. This really becomes a question of what we will communicate, okay? And so, there are some laws out there that speak to this issue of confidentiality. You've heard of these. One is FERPA, the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act, and it's the law. And it's imperative that as a school personnel, you follow this code. And so FERPA says that we are to protect the rights of the child, the rights of the family, through how and what information we maintain, okay? Now, are you expected to be an expert in FERPA? No. Are you expected to recognize that you work in a context where confidentiality, you will learn information. You will learn information about children, about families, about things that are occurring in the community. And the question is, can I share that information? And for the most part, it's like, no, you can't. You need to protect that information. And in many cases, you really need to begin to create boundaries as a paraeducator working in a system where we're trying to create safety and respect for those that we serve. You create those boundaries. So FERPA is one of the big ones out there. Another one is HIPAA. Now HIPAA is really more health oriented, but you will sometimes hear HIPAA referred to, HIPAA regulations, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Much of the issues that occur under HIPAA also are addressed under FERPA. So I'm not expecting you to understand and know the specifics, but that these are terms that you will often hear in the context of education. FERPA is operating here, HIPAA is operating here, which is setting some of those standards. So I want to end by just really giving you some, reflecting on some key thoughts as it relates to this issue of confidentiality. Never violate confidentiality. Now, if I could just put it out there, that's just what it is. It's my goal, my expectation as you to develop some fairly absolute limits on what you will share and with whom you will share it. And you will be challenged on those limits, okay? I've learned over the years, my wife and I are both educators. We worked in the same district for a number of years. And then as my career changed and she continued to work in education, as many people, you sit down at dinner table at night and how was your day? Tell me about your day. And it became very clear at a certain point that, and my wife and I had to respect that there's things that occurred in our day that we shared an interest in that we weren't going to share with each other. And I've learned over the years, and I respect my wife tremendously in that, I would say, who is that? We just met somebody and some family in a store, and they, the little kids came up, Mrs. Abel, how are you? And they're in my classroom. Now, immediately as an educator, I want to know about them as a student and what their needs might be. And I just realized she's not going to answer those questions. So I'm not going to go there, okay? There's need to understand, there's a need to know versus a desire to know, okay? There is often a desire from others to know about what's going on in the school community and what's going on with kids. You may have had an incident in your classroom where someone said, hey, I heard that so-and-so melted down in your classroom. What happened? I really can't talk about that. You may have an office manager say, hey, what's going on with so-and-so in your classroom? I really can't talk about that, okay? Now, is there a need for them to know? I'm not sure. I don't think it's necessarily your job as the paraeducator to determine whether they do or do not have that need. If that information needs to be shared, that information would be shared by the instructional teacher responsible for that particular student, okay? So defining that line. Here's another big one for me, and I'm, again, my community, and I would say it's somewhat similar to different, yours. You meet people in the community and say, hey, I heard such and such happened with such and such a family. What can you tell me about it? I can't tell you. I've often seen in faith communities where you have children and families in faith communities who are being served in the small educational district. And maybe you work in that classroom, and the faith community wants to come together and say, I heard this family has some needs and how can we help? Well, that's so beautifully intentioned. And yet, no, that's not information that you can share, okay? So you are a public and a private person. You operate in a public context and as a private. As an educator, people are looking at you, they're observing you. So when you're in the grocery store, when you're on the sidewalk in the community chatting, when you're, at the end of the church service chatting in the narthex with people, whatever it might be very clear that people are observing you. And they're observing to what extent that you are demonstrating and respecting the context in which you work, okay? If you're unsure about what information can be shared, ask your supervising teacher. It is not your decision. It's not your role to make that decision. It's not your responsibility to make that decision. And in fact, when people come to you with questions, I often would redirect a question. I invite you to talk to the teacher. He or she will share with you what's necessary or appropriate. So this is a hard conversation because people will, in some cases, judge you. Well, don't you trust me? It's not about whether I trust you or not. There's a professional standard here. And I'm a professional and I'm operating within that professional standard. And so sometimes we have to develop a bit of a thick skin. It's like, no, I can't share that information with you, okay? So as a paraeducator, just, basic responsibility, maintain confidentiality. And I would say draw a tight line around that, so as to respect the legal and the human rights of the children and the family we serve, okay? Their privacy and their protection. Following district policies, and so being aware of what those policies are, and asking your team to share them if necessary, okay? And demonstrating and understanding the distinctions in the roles of various educational personnel. And the point is, just because you work in the school does not mean you need to know everything that happens in that school, okay? And so, there's often this sense, well, I work in the school, I need to know what happens. You may want to know, I'm not sure there's a need to know here, okay? So with that in mind, what I would leave you with is, please ask how your team functions. As a team functioning effectively, ask when you don't know or understand, seek clarification, and support the team's effectiveness by seeking clarification about how we function as a team. And specifically as it relates to the context, and we work in a sensitive context around complex issues that affect the lives of children and their families, and that I would develop a high degree of respect for protecting their confidentiality in that context. So with that, I will end, and I think I'm going to hand it back to Norm for a second, if not.
Yeah, Greg, I'll just take a quick second and express appreciation. Great content. I appreciated the conversations in the chat box with everybody. Appreciate it very much. And given our time constraints, we're just going to jump right over into Frank Podopnik's presentation at this time. And as you've seen in the chat, feel free, if you've got questions, to submit those to that Qualtrics link. And we've got a few in there, which is great. And as time allows during session 4, we'll have the presenters and WDE team respond to those. So hopefully we'll have a few minutes to do that. So with that, Greg, thank you so much, and turn it over to Frank.